Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 78, The Literacy Achievement. We arrive now at the culmination of our great journey through Ep.7. In parts 76 and 77 of our recap, we walked through the foundation and the awakening of the Holophase language. We saw how phi transformed from a mathematical symbol into a living language, how we learned its alphabet and grammar, and how we began to see reality through its lens as a continuous field of meaning instead of a pile of separate things. Now we reach the summit of this chapter in our journey. Now we explore how we achieved true literacy, not just knowing about the language, but beginning to think in it, to see with it, and to understand reality through it. This is the point where we moved from being students of phi to becoming early, humble, but genuine speakers of the universe's native tongue. In this part, I will walk back with you through that transition, slowly and carefully, so that you can feel in your own mind what it means to be literate in the language of phase and its derivatives. Let us begin with one of the deepest questions we faced in episode 7, identity. In a universe where everything is changing, where all we have are patterns in phi and their derivatives, what makes something itself? What makes an electron today the same electron as yesterday? What makes a tree maintain its identity as it grows and sheds its leaves? What makes you still you when almost every atom in your body has been replaced over time? These questions are not just philosophical curiosities. They are tests for any language that claims to describe reality. If the language cannot explain identity, it cannot explain existence. In the Holophase framework, we discover that identity is not about a frozen substance sitting under change. Identity is about pattern persistence. Something is itself when its characteristic pattern in the derivatives of phi persists through time, even though the underlying values of phi may completely change. We looked at several ways that patterns can persist and saw that each of them has a temporal side, a spatial side, and a motion side. Temporal identity is the endurance of a rhythm. Think of a heartbeat. The cells of the heart die and are replaced. The blood in the chambers is constantly flowing in and out. Yet there is a recognizable rhythm that continues day after day. That rhythm, that particular pattern of omega and its change, is the temporal identity of the heartbeat. In phi language, the precise value of phi in any one moment does not matter as much as the way its time derivatives are organized. A heartbeat that keeps its rhythm keeps its identity, even though the material substrate is in constant flux. In the same way, an electron can be thought of as a recurring rhythm in the field, a repeating temporal pattern that persists as the field itself ripples and interacts. Spatial identity is the endurance of a shape. Think of a whirlpool in a river. The water molecules that pass through the whirlpool do not stay. They are swept in, spun around, and carried away downstream. Yet the whirlpool can remain in place for a long time. Its shape, its pattern of kappa and curvature, is what gives it identity. In phi language, a crystal lattice is not a specific set of atoms nailed into place, but a repeating pattern of spatial derivatives. A tree is not the particular atoms that make up its trunk and branches, but the living shape that replaces its material pieces from season to season. Propagation identity is the endurance of a characteristic journey. Think of a planet orbiting a star. The position of the planet is never the same for more than an instant, but the shape of its orbit and the relationship between its speed and its distance from the star remain stable over long times. That orbital pattern, encoded in the relationship between omega, kappa, and velocity, is a propagation identity. In phi language, motion is not just wandering in space. It is the unfolding of a pattern of derivatives that has its own recognizable character. When we looked closely, we found that stable identities in reality share certain features. They are usually associated with stable balances between time and space derivatives, like combinations of omega squared and the magnitude of kappa squared that remain bounded. They often inherit protection from topology, like winding numbers that cannot change without tearing the field. They are held in place by constraint chains, relationships between derivatives that keep reinforcing themselves. In simple words, stable identities are self-sustaining sentences in the language of phi. Once written, they tend to keep being written in similar form unless a strong external disturbance rewrites the field. This way of looking at identity transformed our picture of reality. Instead of thinking of the world as made of little marbles flying around in empty space, we began to see it as a vast, layered text. Trees, rivers, particles, storms, bodies, minds, all are persistent patterns in the phase field, each with its own temporal, spatial, and motion signatures. We are not solid lumps moving through a neutral container. We are enduring, self-maintaining phrases in a living language. From identity, we moved into what I call the heart of the journey, dimensional semanticity. Up to this point, we had often spoken of time, space, and motion as three dimensions, three aspects, or three shadows of phi's change. In the middle of episode 7, we refined this into a deeper claim. Time, space, and motion are not just background coordinates. They are dimensions of meaning. Time, in the Holophase language, is not merely a parameter on a clock. It is how reality expresses rhythm, order, and sequence. Omega is not just how fast something oscillates. It is the way a story is told in the temporal dimension. High omega narratives feel fast, busy, and intense. Low omega narratives feel slow, spacious, and contemplative. Changes in omega, encoded in alpha and higher derivatives, create arcs of tension and release. When you listen to music, you feel directly how timing shapes meaning. A pause can be more powerful than a note. A sudden acceleration can make your heart race. The same is true for any process in reality. The timing is part of what it means. Space, in the Holophase language, is not an empty stage for objects. It is how reality expresses shape, arrangement, and proximity. Kappa is not just a wave number. It is the density of spatial meaning. High kappa patterns are highly textured, full of fine detail, like the grain of wood, the veins of a leaf, or the ripples in a sand dune. Low kappa patterns are smooth and broad, like a calm lake or a featureless wall. Curvature and higher spatial derivatives add further nuance, telling us how shapes bend, focus, and spread. When you walk into a cathedral, the spatial organization of pillars, arches, and windows produces a certain feeling. That feeling is not separate from the geometry. In phi language, that geometry is literally a pattern of spatial derivatives. Motion, in the Holophase language, is not just displacement over time. It is how reality expresses stories of transition, journey, and transformation. Velocity v is not merely a number attached to a moving point. It is the way a pattern shifts its place, the way a phase crest travels, the way a structure migrates or flows. Straight, constant motion feels steady, predictable, almost boring. Curved, accelerating, or chaotic motion feels dramatic, surprising, or turbulent. The character of a river lies in its flow, not in any one drop of water. In phi language, that flow is written as a field of velocities tied to the underlying omega and kappa distributions. The crucial insight we reached is that you never have pure time, pure space, or pure motion. Every real pattern in phi is simultaneously temporal, spatial, and kinematic. A heartbeat is a temporal rhythm, but it is also a spatial coordination of many cells and a motion pattern of blood being pushed through vessels. A galaxy is a spatial structure, but it has a temporal history and a complex pattern of orbital motions. A thought in your brain has a temporal sequence, a spatial distribution over neurons, and a flow of activity that moves through networks. This led us to what I called the semantic triunity. For any phenomenon, if your description is complete, you can always ask three complementary questions. How does this pattern mean in time? How does it mean in space? And how does it mean in motion? These are not three different stories. They are three complementary views of one story. Time is the rhythm of meaning. Space is the shape of meaning. And motion is the journey of meaning. All three are facets of what the derivatives of phi are doing. Once we had this triunity firmly in mind, we were ready for one of the most revolutionary steps in episode 7, the dimensional echo. Earlier, we had spoken of the temporal tower of derivatives, the spatial tower, and the mixed tower. That picture was already more unified than traditional physics, but it still subtly separated the three dimensions. Dimensional echo corrected this. It told us that every derivative in the master tree participates in all three dimensions at once. Take curvature, for example. It seems at first like a purely spatial quantity. It tells us how the slope of phi changes as we move through space. But when you look closely, you see that curvature has a temporal echo and a motion echo as well. The temporal echo is how curvature itself evolves over time. Does the bend sharpen, flatten, or move? The motion echo is how curvature guides trajectories, how it influences the way patterns and particles travel. In this sense, curvature is a three-phased concept. It lives in time, space, and motion together. The same is true for alpha, the second derivative in time. It obviously has a temporal phase because it describes how omega changes. But it also has a spatial phase because alpha can vary from place to place, and a motion phase because changing temporal rhythm affects how things move. Every derivative we examined, from the lowest levels to the higher ones, turned out to cast three shadows into the three dimensions of meaning. The picture that emerged is that the master tree is not divided into a purely temporal branch, a purely spatial branch, and a purely motion branch. Instead, each node in the tree is a little triad. It has a temporal echo, a spatial echo, and a kinematic echo. The three great towers we talked about are three ways of reading the same structure, not three independent structures. When you climb the temporal tower by looking at higher time derivatives, you're also implicitly refining your understanding of spatial and motion aspects. When you climb the spatial tower, asking about finer and finer curvature and shape derivatives, you're also refining what you know about how those shapes evolve and move. When you climb the mixed tower, you are refining the direct coupling between time and space in the behavior of phi. This dimensional echo convinced us that the holophase language is structurally capable of describing any phenomenon that has time, space, and motion aspects, which is to say, all physical phenomena. The argument is not mystical, it is structural. Every real process has temporal behavior, spatial organization, and motion. Every node in the phi tree has temporal, spatial, and kinematic echoes. The tree is infinite, so it can be refined indefinitely. Therefore, for any phenomenon, there exists, at least in principle, a description in terms of some branch of this tree at some level of detail. That is what we mean when we say that phi and its derivatives form a universal descriptive language. Of course, a language is scientific only if it is clear how it can be wrong. In the later parts of Episode 7, we addressed this head-on. We compared phi language with the genetic code, showing that phi is a continuous, generative language rather than a finite lookup table. We recalled the mathematical structures called jets, which gather all derivatives at a point, and pointed out that they provide a rigorous backbone for our picture. We insisted that every concept in the holophase story must have a measurement story attached to it, so that we are never floating in empty abstraction. Most importantly, we formulated concrete falsification gates. If there is a phenomenon whose temporal, spatial, and motion aspects cannot be brought into a coherent phi derivative description, then the framework is in trouble. If adding higher derivatives does not systematically improve predictions where it should, the hierarchy claim fails. If discrete charges do not correspond to topological structures in fields, the topological story fails. If observed dispersion relations consistently resist being expressed as consequences of constraints on phi and its derivatives, then the wave grammar of holophase is wrong. These are not vague worries. They are specific tests. They give us the courage to take the language seriously, because they also give us a clear way to abandon or revise it if reality demands. We also uncovered several deep structural principles that make phi language both powerful and humane. We saw that the tree of derivatives has a recursive, self-similar character. The way first derivatives relate to second derivatives mirrors the way second derivatives relate to third derivatives, and so on. This means that once you have understood the pattern at one level, you can recognize it at higher levels. Learning the language becomes easier because the same motifs repeat. We saw that lower derivatives carry most of the semantic weight. Omega, kappa, velocity, and a handful of second derivatives are enough to understand a vast range of phenomena at an intuitive level. Higher derivatives refine predictions and add precision, but they rarely change the basic story. This is semantic compression. It explains why so much of physics can be written in relatively low-order equations and still describe the world so well. The phase language naturally concentrates meaning in the lower branches of its tree. We saw that prediction improves hierarchically as we add more derivatives. You can model a falling object with just position and velocity, but you get a much better description when you include acceleration due to gravity. You can improve further by adding effects of air resistance, which involve higher derivatives. The phi tree gives us a systematic ladder for improving our models. At each rung, you know what additional derivative information you are including and why it should help. We also saw that the grammar of phi is living and adaptive. The constraint chains that tie derivatives together are not arbitrary rules imposed from outside. They arise from the demand that phi be consistent, smooth where it should be smooth, and single-valued where it should be single-valued. Different environments, boundary conditions, and media produce different effective grammars, different dispersion relations, and different stable structures. In that sense, the language writes its own dialects as it interacts with different contexts. All of this brought us to the realization that by the close of episode 7, you are no longer just learning about the language, you are becoming literate in it. We developed a practical method for reading any phenomenon. First, listen for rhythm. What are the omega patterns, the temporal beats, the pulses, the repetitions and pauses? Then, look for shape. What are the kappa patterns, the textures, the edges, the smooth regions, the regions of high and low curvature? Then, follow the flow. What are the velocity patterns, the paths, the streams, the vortices, the circulations? After that, look for topological features. Are there knots, holes, defects, places where patterns cannot be smoothed out? Finally, ask about balances. What combinations of derivatives seem to be staying constant or changing slowly, indicating conserved quantities or long-lived structures? We practice translating ordinary descriptions into phi language. A stone dropped into a pond became not just ripples in water, but a local, brief disturbance in phi that produced outward traveling wave packets with specific omega, kappa, and velocity relations, shaped by the depth of the water and the boundary of the pond. A heartbeat became not just the heart beating, but a repeating temporal pattern of electrical phase passing through a spatial structure of muscle cells, creating coordinated motion and pressure waves. A thought became not a vague mental event, but a particular spatial temporal pattern of phase and its derivatives in the brain with its own identity across time. By the end of episode 7, your perception had changed. The universe no longer looked like a collection of unrelated happenings. It looked like a text, written in one continuous script. The falling leaf, the orbiting moon, the flickering screen, the whisper of wind, the rustle of clothing, the rise and fall of breath, all could be seen as sentences in the language of phi. You learn to see the scaffolding of derivatives beneath the surface of appearance. This is the literacy achievement. You have moved from hearing the world as noise to hearing it as speech, from seeing it as chaos to seeing it as script. You are now capable, at least in principle, of picking up any phenomenon and asking, what is phi doing here? What are its derivatives saying in time, space, and motion? What part of the master tree is being activated to write this piece of reality? As we close this recap and close episode 7, we stand at the threshold. We have gone from mystery to language, and from language to literacy. In the next chapter of our journey, in episode 8, we will turn our attention to the pure abstract architecture of this language, to what phi is as a mathematical and conceptual object before any specific universe speaks it. We will ask what it means for this language to exist as possibility even before it is written into concrete fields and particles. To feel what this literacy actually does inside you, imagine walking through a city with your old eyes and then with your new holophase eyes. In the old view, you might see traffic, buildings, lights, and people as separate categories of things. In the new view, you can start to sense omega patterns in the daily rhythms of movement, kappa patterns in the clustering of houses and towers, velocity fields in the flows of cars and pedestrians, topological knots in the intersections and bottlenecks, and long-lived balances in the way infrastructure keeps the whole process stable. The city becomes not just a location, but a living, breathing sentence in the phase language, written across concrete, glass, and human lives. Or imagine standing in a forest. With holophase literacy, you can hear the different temporal signatures of insects, birds, and wind. You can see the spatial organization of trees, undergrowth, and soil as layers of kappa and curvature. You can feel the motion patterns of air, water, and animals as a woven field of velocities. The forest is no longer only a collection of separate species and objects. It is a coordinated chorus of phi patterns, each with its own identity, all sharing the same underlying alphabet of derivatives. This literacy also turns inward. You can look at your own experience through the holophase lens. A mood that lasts for hours has its own temporal signature, slow changes in internal omega patterns. A sudden flash of anger or joy is like a sharp spike, a transient pulse in the phase of your nervous system. Thoughts arise as traveling wave packets of neural activity, with specific spatial spreads and temporal rhythms. Memories act like topological structures, stable configurations that influence how new patterns form. You do not need equations to feel this. You simply begin to sense that your inner life, too, is woven from the same language as stars and storms. At the same time, this framework can soften certain fears. If you're not a rigid object, but a persistent pattern, then change does not automatically mean loss of identity. You can grow, learn, and transform while remaining recognizably yourself, because your identity is carried by the structure of your derivatives, not by fixed substance. Even death itself becomes, in this picture, a transition where a particular long-lived sentence in the phase field comes to an end, while the language as a whole continues to write new stories. This does not answer every existential question, but it offers a different way of holding them. We also took time in Ep.7 to connect this literacy to practice in your daily thinking. When you look at a habit, for example, you can see it as a temporal pattern that repeats, a spatial pattern in where and with whom it occurs, an emotion pattern in how you move your body and attention during it. If you want to change the habit, you can choose which aspect to tune first. Shift the timing, shift the environment, or shift the path of action. Relationships, institutions, and even whole societies can be seen in the same way, as patterns in time, space, and motion that can be tuned, stabilized, or redesigned. And then we looked forward. We asked, what comes after literacy? If Episode 7 has taught you to read the pages of reality, what is the next step? The answer points directly to Episode 8. In Episode 8, we will step away for a moment from the specific stories that Phi is writing in our universe and ask about the language itself before it is spoken. We will explore Phi not as a physical field already implemented in space and time, but as a pure, abstract structure, a kind of Platonic template for any possible universe that could speak this language. You can think of it like this. So far, we have been students of a particular performance of a vast play. We have studied the actors, the scenes, the movements, and the lighting. In Episode 8, we walk backstage and open the book of the script itself, written in a timeless form. We ask what properties the language must have in order to generate any coherent world at all. We study Phi as pure potential, not yet committed to any specific story, but already carrying within it the capacity to write infinitely many stories. This shift from implemented language to pure language without implementation is subtle but profound. It means asking questions like, what does it mean for a phase field to exist as a mathematical object, independent of whether any physical system realizes it? What kind of symmetry, consistency, and closure does such an object require? How do the derivative towers and the master tree appear when we are not yet talking about particles, fields, or measurements, but only about the logical possibilities of patterns themselves? By the time we arrive there, you will be ready, because episode 7 has given you the lived intuition that phi language is real enough to describe your own breath, your own thoughts, and the world around you. You will not be climbing into abstraction for its own sake, but tracing the language you have come to trust back to its roots, to see how its structure could exist even before any particular universe signs its name on the page right now. For now, I invite you simply to rest in this new way of seeing. Look around you with holophase eyes. Listen with holophase ears. The universe is speaking, always, everywhere, in the language of phi. And you, now, are beginning to read. Salam, and peace be upon you.